Okay, so we are recording now, and yeah, so this event, we are inviting Gary to talk about Lorenz Curves, the long tail distribution, and his work in Excel and statistical modeling in the music industry. How this event is going to run is that Gary is going to run through his slides, but anyone and everyone is welcome to interrupt with questions whenever they arise. It's a very informal session, so we hope you enjoy.
Thank you. Okay, so just to recap then, we're just going to talk about Lorenz curves and the long tail. There's a couple of models that we can share with you afterwards. So, but for now, I'm just going to present my screen and I'll go through some working examples. So this is where it all started, was in the early 2000s. Chris Anderson, a journalist, wrote a book called The Long Tail, The Future of Business is Selling Less of More. So the view was that they believed that as we moved away from traditional bricks and mortar music establishment, and by the way, you'll find that most shops held about 52,000 titles, so physically, which was really small. That's the head. So effectively, they're trying to stock the head at HMV, and we're finding a decline in these stores now. So Chris Anderson's idea was that the future of business is selling more and more products, but fewer and fewer sales for each of the products, so that the tail would extend so far down that everybody will sell one or two items of everything they produce. So if you applied that to the music industry, effectively it's saying that everybody that produces a song is going to get a play somewhere at some time. This is not true. What happened is that Chris Anderson was looking at the very small part of data from an American company, and he was looking at the end part of the tail, as we realized. We were given some data by a major distribution digital service provider company, and they gave us 13 million of their tracks about 10 years ago. And we were able to look at the 13 million tracks and realize that 10 million of those tracks were not activated, meaning just 3 million tracks had had a play, one or more. 10 million had 0 downloads. So we started to look at this and think, wait a minute, something smells here, that this idea of the long tail may not be true. It may be some sort of utopian ideal that as business stocks, as the effectively imagine a stock room that has got an infinite amount of storage space. So the only question was then, is storage space significant? Is the cost of storage and delivery significant enough to have an impact on that inventory? The answer is no, it's not. The cloud is so cheap that it virtually costs businesses nothing to hold music and ready and to deliver it. So there's no similarity now to a physical store, that it does not cost you store space. So it doesn't matter if you now load up 70 million songs rather than 50,000. So what's happened is this huge repertoire has been made available. But the problem is that we've got limited attention. So in a day, if you think about this, you could, in theory, listen. Netflix said their only biggest rival was sleep. Whereas from streaming companies, there is no rival because there's sleep music. So you could, in fact, get 24/7 play, but you're not going to be aware of it for about 8 hours. So just assume you've got 18 hours of listening time, media consumption time, of which the average song length is about 20 per hour, 3 minutes. So you could probably play 20 songs an hour over 3,360 songs a day. That's your limit. You couldn't really listen to more songs. So downloads, you could buy dozens of downloads and not listen to them ever. So that was a way of money coming into the industry. And in the Far East, there tends to be a big fan base where people will buy every version of the album just to become a big fan. So the money situation changed dramatically in that no longer were you getting money up front, and possibly from albums that had maybe one decent song and 10 useless songs. So take Chumbawamba Tub Thumping. There's only one song on that gets played, and the other, I Get Knocked Down, and the other 10 just do not get played. So in the old days, people used to submit albums with one big hit and the rest were fillers, or there was a couple of 2 or 3 hits on it. But the artist was able to kind of offload all of their repertoire into one album, and people would have to buy it. So the question is, what did they play? Did they play that album fully? Well, no one knew. No one knew until streaming came along. We had we had systems where people could like register what they're playing or what they're interested in, but there was no real hard data on it. So until the streaming world came in, we couldn't tell what consumption was going on of an album once somebody had bought it. But just remember that you could multiply a population by 360 plays a day times 365, and you've got a theoretical max of the number of songs that could actually be played. So for the first time, we've got a limit, whereas before there was no limit. There's no limit to how many songs you can download. You could just download thousands and never listen to them. The artist still gets the money, but you don't consume. So here's the first problem, is that we've got an absolute max of the number of songs. So what you could do then is look at the number of songs that are being played in a day and see if indeed, how far are you off the maximum? And at the moment, it's around about 300 to 400 a week for a very high playing sort of player, which is probably a seventh of where you could be if you played all the time. So the goal, obviously, of streaming companies is to have streaming constantly played. Now, here's the thing. Chris Anderson was saying, because of the long tail, you're likely to go looking at more and more obscure tracks, and you're going to keep listening to more and more tracks, but fewer times. And that was the theory. It stands sort of, in theory, it kind of holds up. You think, well, okay, if I put 70 million songs on a platform, they're probably going to get consumed at some point. But the answer is they don't. It's always hit focused. People they are swayed by peer pressure. People do want to find new songs and want to tell people about it, but the only reason they'll do that is so other people listen to it. So if the song's good, there's a big build-up and there's a large number of listeners, and if the song's no good, it stays. Some songs have 0 plays, which is like, what, even the person that wrote it isn't playing it? And often not. They just put it up in the system and it does not get played. Some songs, some of the problem is that some songs have so many covers, it's very difficult to find the song you want. Some songs have over, I think one song had over 100,000 different versions of the same song. Usually about half the songs uploaded each week are duplicates. They're similar, the same work, not new works. And just to give you a background, music is stored as a work, which is when a songwriter writes the song, that's a work. And it's theoretical, it's virtual at this point, it may not have been recorded. And the moment it's recorded, it gets registered as an ISRC recording. So a recording is a physical copy of the song. A song itself could be just a score sheet. So the work doesn't necessarily have to be physical or real. It's just a song sheet and lyrics. And once it's recorded, the ISRC, so there's an ISWC that holds the work, an ISRC that shows all the recordings. So it's the recordings that people are playing, and it's the works that are related to the songwriter. So remember, recordings are artists, works are songwriters. So when we looked at this long tail, the answer is no, it is not selling less of more. The future of business is always hit focused, and we had to look at the distribution of this data set using log normal distribution. So the classic long tail that Chris Anderson was arguing over and proposing was that this green bar is going to extend for miles, and you just will play 1 or 2 songs or buy 1 or 2 products. Always the same. People are hit focused. They want to listen to what their friends listen to. They want to talk about it. If it's not good, it just falls down the tail. So that really, about 10 years ago, we refuted the idea of the long tail and proved that it was not true. It's always hit focused. So I'm going to go through Lorenz curves, and I'm just going to explain what these are and why we use them and what benefit they are. Now, these have been around for 70 or 80 years, and they've not been well used in terms of looking at democratization. We look at Gini coefficients, and we can look at other variables to see how democratized a country is. But what we've done is we use this to look at album democratization. How skewed an album is. Is it one hit on an album, or is there a steady equal number of plays across all tracks? Now, the closer it gets to equal number of plays across the tracks, the closer this curve, this red curve, will move to the line of equality. So the closer it moves up this line here, the more democratized this particular data set is. Conversely, the more it moves down this line of symmetry, down to the head, right to this point here, the more monopolized it is. So if it was a dogleg curve, you'd find that one artist covers everything. So you can only listen to one song. So what we're finding is the typical Pareto analysis of 80-20, where 80% of the output is delivered by 20% of the sales here. We'll find that this, along this line of symmetry, will always add up to 100. So the worst case is like 100% of the songs is coming from virtually one song. So as you get further down, you find that monopolization occurs. It means that ideally, Pareto analysis of 20% of the songs produce 80% of the output is quite healthy. It doesn't work like that. What we've actually got is much tighter head, in that maybe 3% of the artists produce 97% of the output. It means conversely again that 97% of the artists produce 3% of the output. So there's this enormous disparity between what is the head and what is the tail. So this area is the head and this area is the tail, and it's broken by the line of symmetry. So we'll find it goes 95, 5, 96, 4. So at the moment we're finding that it's all down in the democratization very much. But I'll show you an example later where we put democratization in. Is where everything is have the same a line of symmetries where it all adds up to 1. So here's an example. 95% of the revenue. It's like 95, 75, 8. And we had this line of symmetry. So everything always adds up to 100. You could effectively just take one of those numbers from there. So again, on the line of symmetry, this is around about 85, 15. And if we go up here, this is looking around about 80, 20. So these are examples of how the data comes in on Lorenz. This is an example of Lorenz curves zoomed in. So we're zooming into the 90 to 100% and the 0 to 10. And we're seeing here that a particular example, again, this is the sample data, is showing that for album streams, there's been a movement of this percentage from 5% to 4 to nearly 3%. So we've got 4.5% produces 95.5%. This is randomized data, by the way. So this is not real data, but I've just tried to show you how it shows over time. Multiple curves can show you a movement towards the hits. Is it moving towards the hits, meaning fewer artists get money, or is it moving towards democratization, which means more artists get a share of the money? So if this curve starts to move up that way, that's good news for the tail end of the artist. If it moves up towards here, that's bad news for the lower earners, but it's great news for the likes of Drake and Ariana Grande. So same again, if we looked at track streams, similar data, this is showing an acceleration. So with particular tracks, this is showing that if you now measure over every, say, 3 months or every year, you'll see that this curve will move gradually. And obviously we can see that it's actually, as there's a big gap here, it's actually started to accelerate, which is not good, but is also indicative of people, herd mentality. So people like particular artists, they'll all follow that artist. So this is why we find that the Lorenz curve shows monopolization more often than not. So what we've done is we've created a model and we create log bins. So we use log factor 4, which generally seems to be about right, but I can share, sorry, I'll go back previous. Sorry, forgive me. I've just come out of here. So at the moment, I'm going to go through, right, so we're looking at this particular model of log bins. And so what we're doing is we're now saying, rather than doing a histogram of streaming and album sales, we're going to look at how many songs played 0 to 1 time, how many songs played 2 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 10, and we follow this logarithmic group until finally we get up to a figure around about, like we've got here, 17 million to 31 million. How many times does a song get played? And if it gets played in a certain time period, in say it gets played 10,000 times, it's going to go in log group 17. So what we can do is we add those up and say how many plays in total then. So if there's one play and there's 1,000 songs, 1,000 plays in total. If there's 2 plays and there's 1,000 songs, it will be 2,000 plays in total. So once we add that up, we end up getting a normal distribution occurs, and it is based upon a logarithmic range. So we call it log normal. This is the log normal distribution. This is showing how the number of low streams are very low in total. And as we go towards the median mode, we find that that's the peak of the stream. So if I can, there we go. So just, this keeps coming up. I don't know if you can see this. So what we find is that this is almost a perfect bell curve. And this is really exciting. When you start to see data like this, you instantly know, right, there's a pattern. People are being typical, if you like. So a couple of things to point out here. On this perfect curve, which we create using values of mu, sigma, and k, we try and align these 2 lines as straight as possible. What we end up with is what we call breakouts and break-unders. So in some groups, there's on a single snapshot of data, you can tell whether this data set follows a standard curve or not, or has it got some deviation to it. So in this case, we're able to say that for artists that are playing over 63 million sales, 63 million downloads, there's actually underperforming. So if you see here, we should expect in this line here, if you see my mouse, this should be a lot higher, and so should these. These guys are breaking out, meaning they're actually too high for the curve. So what's going on? Now, every time we've looked at one of these models and we see that there's a breakout, sorry, go back. We see that there's a breakout here going over and a break under, it always shows that there's a problem with the data. So in this example, this was based upon a digital service provider that had advertised some artists on their front screen. So the problem is it skews everybody. As soon as they see that artist on the front screen, people start listening to that. So once we saw that breakout group, we could then say, what's in that? And then we questioned it. The answer was, well, these guys have been promoted more. So we were able to say, well, look, cannibalization is going on then. These artists should be getting plays, but these artists are getting more. So if you want to be really democratized and have fewer people arguing with you about the spread of money and the distribution of resources, it should follow this curve as closely as possible. So that's the best fit model. So zooming in, we're noticing that in a group of 3,000 to 6,000 downloads, there's a lot more than we expected. And that will always be a problem. There's no way that that can occur without something extremely kind of foreign coming into the data set and skewing it. Here's an example of log normal distribution that is skewed to the hits. If Chris Anderson was right, if he was correct in that the future of business is selling less of more, in this section, that whole curve would have been skewed over to the left. It means that everybody's buying millions, everyone's playing billions of songs, playing them only once or twice. That does not happen. And so what we were originally, the whole business world was excited about the long tail, but it's not true. If it's skewed to the left, he was correct. The long tail theory holds up. If it skews to the right, it's wrong, meaning everybody looks at hits. And so this particular example is an extremely skewed model. This comes from a TV company. And the TV company gave us some data and said, look at all our programs that are running and put this through the model. Now, bear in mind, there's no time-based data here. One snapshot, one piece of data, 1 month's worth of data. Show us what it is, show us some meaning in this. So by plotting this particular model, by making them into log groups and looking at all the programs that were running and the number of the number of views that are occurring, we noticed that this extreme outlier here. First of all, I mean, it really grabs you. It might even be a bimodal distribution. We might have two modes of distribution going on here. One here, sorry, go back again. One here and one here. But as it stands, it's a single distribution. This is an extremely popular TV series. It means that, I won't tell you what it is, I'll be revealing the data, but it was an extremely popular TV series, and it showed that the demand far outstripped the supply. And so the big so what in that was, you can drop the bandwidth if it was being streamed, that there's more people want that particular TV show than really you can cater for. So drop the bandwidth, save hundreds of thousands on the delivery costs, because it's showing that it's actually stealing views from other parts. So this is really to say, what's taking what from where. Here's an example of an extreme outlier, and this is a really messy data set. So you don't always get good, nice curves. This is a really ugly looking curve, and we couldn't do much with that. Right, once you've done the curve, you're able to then say, if I just go back 2 pieces, you're able to see how much in each group are you over or under. Are you over a bit here? You are here, but you're under here. So what we can then do is plot a variance curve. So this says, in which group are you over or underperforming? So at a glance, you can see the deltas between, on this perfect curve, am I doing well or am I not? And that was a really good little graph to show which group. And again, you don't know what the meaning of it is until you see which artists are in those groups. This is called an absolute value Lorenz curve. And this is kind of showing not as a percentage. So what the percentage of Lorenz curve says is what percentage of products produce what percent of output. These are absolute figures now. So these are saying this absolute number, this number of streams is coming from this number of products. And you can see how it grows. If it starts to grow up that way, you're seeing that more products are being added, but fewer streams are happening. So it's becoming democratized. If it starts moving towards the right strongly, it means that the streams are increasing, but the number of products aren't. So what we really wanted was to see a nice kind of symmetrical growth here. But again, look, the curve is like that. It's zooming up in terms of products, but the number of streams weren't increasing here. And here, the number of streams are increasing. So people are taking it up. Here, they're not. It's like you've dumped a load of products onto the system, and I'm not seeing anywhere near the same number of streams that should be coming out. So here's another way of showing the Lorenz curve using absolute values. So that's the kind of overview of what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to run you into, move this out of the way, I'll work through a particular model. So this is working data. And what I'm going to do is show you how to create a Lorenz curve using sample data. Now this is chart data. This is chart data from about 5 years ago. But it's typical data that we can use. And by the way, I've randomized it as well. So I've put a randomization factor in, so this isn't real data. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an example and show a Lorenz curve, and we're going to build one from scratch, and we're going to compare week 1 to week 2 of data. Okay, so the first thing is we need to look at the number of units. Now I'm going to go through this. There should be only 200, I think, in this particular model. Yeah, so we've got 200. This is the top 200, and we're going to look and assume this is our entire data set. Do interrupt if you want me to stop at any point, but I'm just literally going to show you how this model is built. So the first thing is we need to find out the percentage of products. The next thing we want to find out is the percentage of what we call output. So what's being played from what percentage. Now, the product percentage is going to be the position. This is the first product, second, third, fourth, fifth. So I'm going to say one product out of the total products, 200, gives me the percent. So that's saying that that's 0.05%. And as we go up, you'll notice that we can see the percentage as we go up. We'll get to 100% of the products as we go to here. So showing you the number at the linear number of we go through the top 200. So put that as 0. I'll make that 0. The next thing is we're going to now have to amalgamate we're going to do it on downloads. So let's do it on units, because units are set as they're descending. So they're actually in order at the moment. So what we've got to do is sort this in a descending order. This one has already been done. So just assume I've done this already. I've sorted it. What I'm now going to do is sum it. So I'm going to see an amalgamation of each of these outputs. So for the first song, it's put out 75,000 downloads together. And when we go down, this is to show you that the total number of downloads for that entire set is 1.6 million. So now we've got the top number, we've got the actual total number of downloads. So now we can look at the percentage of the output. That first song represents 0.045%. So I'm just going to drop the percentage figure in. So it's 5%. So we're seeing here that 0.5% of the products generate 4.5% of the output at the top of the model. I'm going to pull that down, and you'll notice it will now towards 100%, and that can get less and less as we go further, right down at the bottom of the data set. So this is 100. So there we go. So now what we're looking at is, you can see the line of symmetry figure plus this figure adds up to 100, and you can see the point roughly where that's going to be. Let's pull back the symmetry. So we can see the model when it adds up to 100, it's around about here. Therefore, that's a 70-30 model. You see that? So 30% of the output puts out 70% of the 30% of the products put out 70% of the output. That's pretty democratized. That's nowhere near what we're seeing on streaming. So if I take the streams, I'm going to do the same figure. Now, bear in mind, these are not sorted. So I'm going to show you how to do it sorted. Let's move these in again. I'm going to put a new data set in here. Sorry. Right, so I'm going to copy the streams, and I'm going to sort them, and you'll see the same effect. So first thing we've got to do with Lorenz curve analysis is sort it. Data, sort. And sorry, we're going to sort from high to low. Okay, so let's just have a look. Now remember, the downloads have come out as 70-30. We're going to see what streams are going to come out at. We can use the same products. We know that it's position 1, that's fine. That's the top product. So I'm going to use that same percentage here. But what I'm now going to do is sum it. Sum these guys. Lock the first column, lock the first row, and then double click and copy down. So here's our total number of streams that have come out. Now let's see what these percentages look like. So we're dividing that by the total, lock that one. That comes out at 3%. Copy that down. And again, I'm going to add that figure to the products, and you're going to get a figure that is going to be near 100. At the top end, it's 200 always. I'll show you here. They're always 200% because we're adding the 200s together. But again, I'm now looking for the 100%. Here we are. So again, this is 68, 32, 68. So this is even more democratized. So I'm seeing that downloads are less democratized in this data set than streaming is. In a streaming world, the real world, looking at all data, remember this is the head, this is only the top 200, we would be finding something around 5% produces 95% of the output. So what we then end up with is we've got these two sets of data, this one and this one. So what we're going to do now is plot it, and this will form the Lorenz curve. So here's the two data sets. Just to recap, it's the percentage of products as it accumulates right up to 100%, and it's percentage of, in this case, downloads. So I'm going to insert a scatter chart, drop a line on it, and there's the curve. Now, first thing is, it's the wrong way around. So I've got to now format the axis where I'm going to flip, put the values in reverse order, and I'm just going to put the labels down as high. And that puts it down to the low part. Right, I'm now going to change the boundaries. It should be at 1. There's no point having it at 1.2. And then we'll see that's the Lorenz curve. We'll take the markers off. It's not needed. None. There's your curve. Right. So we've just built a Lorenz curve from that set of data. I'm going to move it out a little bit, and you can see I'm going to draw the line of symmetry in. So let's just put a quick shape in here. Here's a symmetry line. And you can see 30-70. And that's where it shows 30% of the output has produced 70% of the 30% of the products has produced 70% of the output. Just to confirm on that data set, there it is. There's your 100%. So it's accurate. It proves that works. So what we could then do is we've got this one data set. We're going to do exactly the same thing. I'll just move this guy out of the way a little bit. We'll do exactly the same thing with this data set here. The second week, and we'll just apply it. And that, so really this is, I'll recap again so you can see, but this is how to build a Lorenz curve. So the first thing is now we need to look at these downloads, and I'm going to sum these. Let's do it as sales units again. Lock one of those, I've got to lock one of the cells there, and then copy it all the way down. What we end up with then is a percentage of that divided by the highest one there, and let's just see if the week is any different. And you can do this for every week. You can do this for every data set, and you can then plot them one against the other and see what's actually going on. So again, let's try and find out where the symmetry is occurring. Bear in mind, I'm using the same product percentage here, this one. Right. Now we find at 100. Again, we're at 71, 29, 70. So not a lot has changed. But what I can now do, I'm going to plot the second lot of data. So my data is going to come, let's select data, let's add a new series. So the X values we're going to get at here. These are my X values, and my Y values are this one up here. My new ones here. So start with 0. There we go. Right, and then what we're going to get is a second set of, there we are. So what we've got now is the second curve has come in, and we can now see that that's slightly more monopolized. What we've got is a figure of around about 28.72. So this example then says from first week to second week, the songs have become more hit focused. It means that people are pushing more towards what's in the top layer of the songs than at the bottom layer. Now, the reason why we do a Lorenz curve rather than a histogram is I'm just going to show you one of these charts as a histogram. Now, this is only 200, right? You've got 70 million different songs out there now. So you imagine the state of this histogram when you've got 70 million. You won't even be able to plot it, I don't think. So this is just a flat histogram. It's almost like a dog leg most of the time. So that's really what we would call the long tail. But bear in mind that that's the head. That's the top 200 guys, and it's already looking like a long tail. If you notice just how extreme the first sort of ones are, so what you end up getting is something called a plateau. And if you look at this visually, it's very difficult for a computer system to find this, but visually you can find it very easily. In that you've actually got 3 artists sitting way at the top, and then you've got maybe a second group, and then you've got everybody else. So you can start to kind of group artists by tier A artists, tier B artists, and tier C artists, and you can, and there's everybody else. And bear in mind, this is the head, so these guys are still pretty famous. And if you started to look at everybody else, this chart is going to go off for like 5 miles to the right hand side. It's so ridiculously bad, you can't actually work this out using a normal histogram. That's why the percentages are really important. Okay, so that is that Lorenz curves, like in a nutshell, really. And the reason why we want to use them is that we can see gradual movement towards monopolization or democratization. Now, I'm going to show you one other one, and this is a set example. I'll delete this and begin again. So we can do this with albums. So let's assume this is, I've made this up entirely. I've just put some randomized factors in here to just make this album very democratized. So this is saying, imagine there's an album and you've got an artist and he's released 12 tracks, or she's released 12 tracks on the album, and they're all fairly similar. So the actual number of outputs are almost identical. Now, if I'm going to put a little bit more of a better randomizer in there to show it, but so here's the figures. So now what I've got are these two. I've done the same percentages. I've done exactly the same thing. I've divided 1 by 12, so that's 8%, 16, 25, and we can see eventually 100. I'm also dividing the number of, say, tracks played, the number of plays per track on that album, and we're dividing it by the total. So what we end up with, if we add these two figures, we should have a very kind of 50-50, to be honest. It should occur around about that mark on the, so remember this always goes from 0 to 200. There's your 0 figure. And the democratization should be at 50%. There we are, it's 50-50. That proves that's the line of equality. Now, if I plot this, you'll see an example of absolute kind of symmetry, absolute equality. So let's plot it again with a better line, actually. Here we go. We'll drop a line on it. And remember, we've got to reverse the y-axis to make it look. There we go. And we make these labels high. There we are. Again, put it back to 100%. It can't be greater than 100. And again here. And what you get is, remember what we said about this line of equality? That's what equality looks like. So if we drew a line of symmetry here again, remember the line of symmetry is this one, that's 50-50, spot on. And obviously you can see we don't need to draw that line. That's the line of equality, it's exact. So let's just try changing this a little bit. Let's assume now rather that the guy got a ridiculously high number of his first song. This is Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba. They got like 3 million. You'll see the effect, or you should see the effect. So let's have a look. Oh, I know why. Sorry. I'm changing all the data. I'm just going to fix this data. Paste. And I'm going to show you an example of an album that is not democratized. So let's assume that there's 300,000 tracks there. There we go. And let's assume then that that's like 600,000 plays. And then again, this goes to a million. This gives you an example of how undemocratized that is. Now, what we're going to find is probably they're not all going to go that equal afterwards. You'll probably get something along the line of maybe 100,000 here, and so on. 40,000. This is a non-democratized album. You're seeing that it's pushing further and further towards the left. Now, if we make this massive, I'm going to give it like 100 million. This is an album. That is what it will look like. That is a very non-democratized album. Just to give an example of the further it pushes down there, the worse it is. Now, the big so what for that? You can show a record label these two charts and say that if this artist of all their repertoire for a particular album or their entire repertoire is moving towards there, then there is no point releasing albums for that artist, because in the streaming world, you're not really consuming albums anymore. You're going to consume top streams. So I'd say for a record label, the further to the left, the more likely it is you should not release an album. The more it is up to the line of equality, then the more likely is that you would release an album that's got hits on every single track. An artist that is an example of that is J. Cole. He's almost perfectly symmetrical. That means, again, that it shows you a degree of quality for an artist, that if the line of symmetry is closer, if it's closer to the line of symmetry on this Lorenz curve, that's a higher quality, consistent artist. So you could even measure it that way and have an index to see how far away are they from the line of equality. The closer they are, it means the more equal all of their work is being consumed. Meaning, I would say quite strongly that's a very consistently popular artist. For artists that are flash in the pans, or very limited, their occasional hit merchants and the rest of it's dross, you'll find that that's coming out on the bottom left. So that would be, why waste money now on studio time for tracks that no one is going to listen to? It's not worth it. So it needs to change the way that they release music. And this is the chart that can do that. So there we go. That's the Lorenz curve. What we can do later, and I'll do this for another session if you still want me to talk, we can start looking at sample data and relative items. So we can say, how many are we getting in each log group, and as a total, what do we get, and what's the total number of sales from each group, and that's what plots it. So that is effectively your log normal distribution. If I plotted that as a map, then you get to see this lovely bell curve. So there's some proprietary stuff. So what I wanted to do is strip this out and release a simple version to you. But this is enabling us to kind of play around with these sales lines. So I can start moving this line left and right using the mean move value. Sigma, I can change the deviation. I can make the chart a bit more peaked. So this is how I start to kind of tweak these perfect line. The further I get off it, you can see these lines, it's clearly nowhere near. So I have to play around with these values to make sure that this best fit line fits the best, so that I can see where the deviations are coming. That happens to be the example in that case. So that was kind of using a Lorenz curve to show monopolization or democratization of a data set based upon its single line of symmetry, which means it always adds up to 100, and its line of equality. As we move up to the right, it's more democratized. As we move down to the left, it's more monopolized. Do you have any questions from that?
Yeah, I was wondering if, for a non-monopolized song, could a streaming company maybe recommend that song to users to listen to in order to increase, the democratization of it, in case it's like related to a popular song?
Yeah, I mean, that would be probably a good idea, is balancing. You've got to kind of measure what people want based upon what you want to push. So playlists are a form of propaganda in a way. It's a form of payola, in that you're being pushed what you want to listen to. How would you do this? You would probably do it as a record label if you do not want to upset some of your lower artists, in that you might want to kind of push some of their streams around, because once you see this curve, you can see, and once you see the log normal distribution, you can see that just how skewed some of these usages are towards the hits. So I'm trying to think, why would you do that? You would, I mean, of a given record label, a major label has got about 32 to 35,000 artists on their books at any one time. These are the three majors. Out of the three majors, around about 1,500 to 1,800 of those artists are on roster. And what on roster means is that they're actively managed and marketed. So there's teams of marketing specialists and music specialists and promotional specialists at each record label. And they maybe have like 10 to 20 artists per person for the regular ones. The big ones have one-to-one groups. But what you find is that about 1,800 of those are on roster, meaning that they're actively managed by the label, which means around 30,000 artists are off roster, which means their contract's ended. They're not being actively marketed. So for a record label, they probably don't, I won't say don't care about off-roster artists. They've kind of had their bit, they've done it over their 3 years and they're finished. They'd only get money now from masters. You would probably want to appease your 1,800 on roster artists. Now, over 3 years, when we looked at a major label, out of those 1,800, only 100 artists stayed in the head over 3 years, which is a phenomenally small amount if you think about it. 100 out of 30,000 top artists, these are, not just regular, only 100 of them managed to stay in the head for the consistent 3 years, which is almost like professional footballer ratios. So few like top musicians. So I'd say you would probably do want to push some songs to your lower rostered artists. As for everybody else, we simply don't have enough attention because of the 360 kind of place song limit. And the other thing I mentioned last time, a few weeks ago, is that we did some analysis on attention economics and questioned, why do people not read a book once they finish reading it, and why do they not watch a movie once they finish reading it, but why do they play a song seconds after they've played it? And the answer, we think, is it's around 2 hours of attention before you're out, before you're kind of filled up and say, I'm getting no more juice, no more buzz from this. So songs, when we divided the number of songs by average hour that a movie plays or a book is read, it works out around about 34, 35 songs, and then you're out. Once you've played that many times, you're kind of filled up. So bear that in mind as well, is that you've got a saturation point. You can't keep pushing the song. Eventually, the song will bifurcate and it will become either nauseous to you or nostalgic. But there's a lockout period that after this sort of peak curve has come in place and you've had all the usages, it drops to a steady level. And after about 18 months to 2 years, maybe, you may go back into that song, but you may find it's nauseous like Crazy Frog, or nostalgic like Frankie Valli, for example. That comes in, ABBA comes in as nostalgia, homesickness it means. So the nausea side you've got to be aware of as well, that if you push something too much, it's almost like drinking too much of a particular alcohol. If you overdo it, it sickens you. And it does seem to do that with music. Now, as to what that actual absolute figure is, I don't know, but it might be worth a bit of research. What's the maximum amount of times you can listen to a song, really, before you are fed up with it and never listen to it again? So we've got to also be aware that out of this sort of big pool of listening, out of these available hours, of which maybe 2.5 hours a day people listen to media, either passively or actively, either in the background or foreground. Out of that 2.5 hours a day, everyone's competing for those listening spots, which is really only about, what, 50 songs a day? And that adds up to roughly about 400 a week, which is really what people play. Okay. It's a balancing act, basically.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. I think we have someone else who has a question. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just have a question. Yeah, just can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just following on what you just said just now in terms of like, kind of like, are we seeing that with like kind of like an expiry date for songs? For example, like how long do songs really dropping, and how does that change between different countries, different genres, and so on? That's
a good question. Okay. There's not a simple answer to that, because it obviously does change by country and by genre.
Mm-hmm.
There seemed to be, now this is probably another PhD research paper, there seemed to be a pattern. Bear in mind, everything becomes fractal in a way. So there seemed to be a pattern in the tempo and time signature of a song and its consumption pattern. So the more middle of the road tended to have a consumption pattern that was kind of a little bit like that. And some of the bigger kind of more impact hits, Eminem type stuff, or kind of heavy rap, will come in at a peak and drop away very quickly. So if I can try and find a model for you, I'll show you while we're talking. It's lifetime value. You get what we found was something called a double dip. The first time the song is played, if it's popular, you get a peak, and then it drops off after 3 weeks or so. And then on the 4th to 6th week, it picks up again, which is the laggard. So people that have heard about it, and then it starts to decline. So the answer to your question is, it's about 2 to 4 months before a song loses its vivacity. And then after that, it hits this baseline, and then it is waiting forever until it's got a synchronization deal. It might appear in a movie, Guardians of the Galaxy, and off it goes again, or it might appear in an advert, or it just sort of kind of fades and dies, or there might be a big revival, usually a decade later, not so soon. So I don't know the answer to this, but I think it's probably worth researching by genre, what track a song. And I can tell you some data, for example, count the number of songs that are played in total by a given user group, a given cohort, and calculate what percentage had a release date of this year. So all songs released this year, and then add up all the songs that have a release date of this year minus 1, last year, and what percentage. And you'll notice, if you ever get hold of this data, that it's almost remarkably consistent in that it's about 1/3 of the songs are listened to from year 0 and about 16% are listened to from year -1, and about 8% year -2, and it drops down to that figure. And then that's what we call a decay curve. So I can do that later as another session, talk to you about decay curves and show you over the overall life of a particular song, how does it decay? And it decays fully over about 3 years to a point where it's really on a baseline, because it's lost. Bear in mind, the artist will now be off roster, so there won't be any promotions for that song. And again, people have probably listened to it about 30 times and it's kind of lost its juice. So it would be good to track songs that are still juicy. So you've got a company called Hypnosis, Mark Mercurius, who's buying songs like There's No Tomorrow. They've realized that there is intrinsic value in royalties in the rights of songs, in that they seem to withstand any type of economic upset. So he's found a remarkably profitable area and he's buying these songs. But if you could define the juiciness of each of these songs, how much juice is left, you're effectively going to work out how much more life is in the entity over years. And I think that's really valuable, to try and look at a song and work out its overall book value. How long is it, what is this worth over 5 years based upon its consumption curve, maybe in the first few months. One thing to use as well, one thing we've always found very useful, is taking a week 1 index. So whenever a song is played, take its week 1 figure and then look at week 2 and see what that is as an index to week 1. Is it 1x, 2x, 3x week 1, or is it 0.5x? If you start to map that and track those multipliers week by week, you will find a curve that definitely shows a double dip. So it invariably goes up like maybe 3 times its first week's play, drops a little bit to 2 times, then goes up 2.5 times, and then drops down eventually back to less than what it had on week 1. So week 1 indexing is extremely useful to do. So that's simply take the value of week 1 and divide all subsequent weeks by that first value and see what the percentage uplift or drop is on that. And that's something I don't think a lot of record labels do. But week 1 indexing analysis is extremely helpful, because once you start to get a cluster of songs that like the same genre, you'll notice that they all come in the same way. If they start at, say, 10 plays in week 1, they have a very different pattern to a song that has 1 billion plays in week 1. You'll notice that there are actually 3 clear scales of songs, very low, medium, and very high, but they all operate with different but very consistently similar decay in consumption curves. Any other questions? We can do some more models later if you want, if this has been useful for you. I mean, I've probably got about 200 models I could walk through and just sort of extract some of the useful bits for you.
I've got a couple of questions, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So thanks, firstly, thanks very much for the presentation. That's quite, found that quite interesting. I was just wondering, do you, from your modeling work that you do you give, say, low-ranking musicians tips on what type of music or how to make their music more popular? What kind of music to write to get it more popular, from perhaps your categorization of the music? And also, I was just wondering if you've noticed any trends recently or regularly, for example, from the recent COVID-19 or bereavements, lockdown and unemployment, etc., leading to more popularity of comforting music or something like that, or perhaps different types of music at different times of days or at the weekends, and things like that.
Yeah, to both of those points then. So the first one being for musicians, how can you advise them on sort of the low-ranking musicians? It's probably, I would say, synchronization rights are probably the most lucrative in this respect. So it's a terribly difficult, imagine like Premier League football, it's terribly difficult to try and get up the top. So the first thing I would do is look at where you are number one. Everything is chart based. Now, if you didn't know, we think parabolically. We don't generally think symbolically. We listen parabolically as well. We compare. So parabolic thinking is I compare where I am at, what I'm listening to, with something above or below me in a ranking. So if all music is ranked, everything is ranking. Now, at the moment, you'll notice that the rankings are really sort of simple. I'm ranking by download, and I'm ranking by streams. I'm not ranking by popularity. I'm not ranking by exposure on social media. I'm not ranking by how happy my songs are. There's loads of different things I can rank on. So the big problem that smaller artists have is kind of getting noticed. It's the same problem people have when you leave university without job experience. How do you describe you've got experience? You want to sort of show something. So a good way to do this for a lower ranking artist is to find out where they are number one, where they are top in some way. So what you might need to do is, rather than have these global charts, which honestly you very rarely will get into, you might want to say that in a particular town, in a particular week, in a particular genre, amongst a particular audience, you were probably in the top 10. So that's a way of getting a record label to notice a particular artist, is to say, find out where you were in the top 10 somewhere. So you've got to go obviously right down, but it might even be things like in hip hop, January the 1st, 2019, under the 30 to 40 LGBTQ community. In Amsterdam, I was number 7 in hip hop for that week. At least you can sort of show I was something. So that would certainly help. The other one is, I would say, look at the trends of music that are being used in movies and adverts. See how those are so synchronization is synchronizing a track with a particular other media, such as a movie or an advert. You will find that there's certain trends. Certain industries have certain trends. So like airlines have trends towards classical. Hardly anybody uses jazz. I would say then look at the trends of what music is being used in what movies, and a songwriter could probably write and work out where that's going. That's a kind of easy, I'd say, a way of making money for a low ranking songwriter. And again, promote yourself as like I was in the top 10 here, a very small top 10, but I'm a big fish in this small pond is what you basically want to be saying. And your other point about have trends changed? Yes, they do. Andy Haldane, the chief economist at the Bank of England, came to Spotify because he had a theory that was reasonably proven that the GDP of a country follows the happiness levels of songs more than anything. So songs are a very intimate and private indicator of how you're feeling, way more than Facebook or like statuses. The fact that you play a particular song. So, you know, one person we did know played All By Myself over 400 times on Valentine's Day. Now, there's no, you know, you can tell where they're at. You can't tell the names, but you can see that number of songs got played. So there is a tendency towards more melancholy music when the economy is dropping, and when there is happiness, there's a tendency for more upbeat music. Look at Economist. Check those out. Economist is a company bought by Spotify that measures the kind of brightness. TiVo does the same thing as well. It measures the happiness level of music. So it definitely does show that. You'll find that it follows the country mood almost spookily closely.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Just a quick follow on the first one. So when you give the tips and things to low-ranking musicians, does that make them feel more valued and alleviate some of the problems I think that you previously identified, where they might be complaining that other higher ranking musicians are getting feature things on Spotify's homepage or something like that?
Yeah, it's very undemocratic really at the moment. It's always been like that. But the main thing that keeps lower ranking artists happy is attention and fans. So it's really about building up. I'd say get them to focus on building up their fan base more than anything. Don't worry about the streams. People are not record labels want people who have listeners, and so that's the thing you need to work on more than anything. is build up your listener base to over 10,000. If you've got that as a figure, you probably can get your foot in the door in some way by talking to one of the local editors. The other thing is release songs on soundtrack, because there used to be as songs get produced, because it's another company owned by Spotify, they would have picked songs up more quickly if you produce stuff on that, because soundtrack want to push that as well. Other than that, extremely difficult. That's all I can say. It's extremely difficult now because it's a huge pond, and most people are very small minnows in that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay. So this has been useful. I mean, I don't mind doing this once a month. We can sort of kind of cover these areas, and then I can also release some data. And if you want to work through it, the Lorenz curve, I mean, I hope you picked up for how to do that, but it's extremely useful curve to do. And the log normal, which I can go into a lot more detail later, is really perfect for snapshots where you've got no temporal analysis. There's no temporal sort of data movement. You've only got one view. You need to be able to say, I've got to find something else about this. I've got to know whether this is following a model curve. Because, by the way, I mean, nature tends towards normal distribution. Anything that is skewing that means that there's an external factor affecting it. If you left the world to its own devices, everything would take a normal distribution. It's all bell curve. And that's what makes it so, I think, so reliable, so fascinating that you do find these patterns. But we can talk about Pareto analysis later. We can talk, I mean, all manner of, we've got compasses that show directions that songs are moving in. Invariably, you can't look at this data without seeing something in it. There's patterns and insights galore. It's as if there's more data now than people know what to do with. So there's a great world out there for data scientists and insights. But I would say develop intuition with the data. Try and sort of look at these different ways of presenting it, because there's some really standard boring histograms and there's some much more interesting percentages. Like that plateau, when I showed you on the charts that week, there were 3 artists at the top. Well, how about counting those every week and see what that number does? Does it change? You'll get to see a pattern that way. We did that with album tracks. We looked at major artists and said, are there any songs in this plateau? And the answer was, yeah, there's 3 or 4 always with artists. There's like only 3 or 4 songs that you can love. So, but bear in mind also for these smaller artists getting in, they are not only competing with the big artists, but they're competing on attention as well. And that's why I just think it's almost impossible. That's why it's quite a depressing sort of job when you work with the 25 million musicians that aren't really making any money out there. So it's a tremendously difficult world, to be honest. And I think that the problem is more people think they're musicians than actually are. It's like kick a football around and then insist you get paid Premier League football wages. It doesn't work. You've got to be popular, and it's always hit focused. So it's a cutthroat world out there. I can't say that I wouldn't want to be a young musician right now. Terribly stressful. So few make it. But again, focus on your fan base and focus on actually being good in some area, like the Beatles worked in Hamburg. Just work in a particular area. Be very well known in a particular area. That at least be a fairly big fish in a very small pond. That will get you noticed. We thought there ought to be a chart called #1 for everyone. Now, where are you #1? At what time? You must have been #1 somewhere. And that's good to sell. That's what labels want to say, but particularly fan base listeners. Okay.
That's very fascinating and interesting. I think we did have another question from someone. Don't know if they want to ask.
Oh, I did have one question. Was just wondering what you thought about SoundCloud moving towards fan power royalties, sort of democratization, that kind of thing.
Perfect. That's the way to go. I mean, a lot of people have asked Spotify why. You know, the way that model works at the moment is that people pay their $9.99, and you add up all the streams, and it's stream share. So what percentage of streams has that artist got? They get that percentage of the cut of money. And that means you might be paying money to Ariana Grande and have never listened to her. So it's called user-centric royalties. Unfortunately, it's tremendously difficult to do. It's because the cost of doing that, unless you've got a system really already designed to do that, it's very expensive to try and track what people are listening to. And to a degree, now, how much of the song are you listening to? If you listen to 2 minutes of a 3-minute song, should you just pay 2/3 of that? currently Spotify pay for everything over 30 seconds, which is why you got a lot of people gaming it and just have songs for 31 seconds. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the point. I just think we've had people build up robots, like bots, to play songs. Someone made a lot of money out of it, and it's quite legitimate, but it's a real problem. Similarly, look for sleep music. There's a lot of competition over that as well. There's even blank songs out there, and there's a lot of versions of that. Yeah, so is there anything else on your question? I can't. Well, my point was about the 30 seconds, but I can't remember what your point was. Does that help your question, or do you need anything else from that?
Oh, I think I think that answered it. Yeah, I definitely don't. I don't know whether Spotify would go towards that kind of model given their size.
They should do. They wanted to originally, but I don't think they will. But anything that enables fans to be more supportive of the artist, I think it's far better to have a user-centric model, which means that if I paid $9 and I only listen to this one artist, that artist should get all of my $9, less administration. Tipping is also very powerful. Patreon is a really useful system. Remember, like maybe 8-9 years ago, the average person spent about $40 a month on music. Now we only spend 10. So you don't have the opportunity to stream more. You can't suddenly pay twice as much. So that was the problem with the streaming model, the eat all you can. That even if you wanted to give money to an artist, it's really difficult to do so. So there needs to be ways to be able to tip an artist, send money additionally, support them, basically. So I think these are coming in. Spotify started to put that in as well. Patreon's really big on that. But anything where the fans can connect with the artist directly would be useful. One of the things they could possibly do is like kind of tiered interaction with an artist, so that at the lowest level you might get a newsletter. At the highest level you might be asked to collaborate with a song. That would be great for an artist to do. You know, have multiple levels of interactivity with fans. Level 1 at this price, free, gets you just my newsletters and photos. Level 4 might get you sort of inside private, like early release videos. Level 3 might say, I'll let you know when gigs are there. Level 2, you can be in my music video. Level 1, you can collaborate with me. I think that would really engage people as well. It's sort of getting fans to feel like fans just want artists to speak to them. I mean, that's the thing, just to acknowledge them. And if artists manage their fan base well, that's really what for smaller artists, be respectful of your fan base and build the fan base up and offer them things. People just want to be liked and recognized. Particularly in the Far East, Japan is a remarkable market to have a look at. It's one of the weirdest markets for fans, and that if there's 7 versions of an album out, fans will buy all 7 versions of that album. They just want to be super fans and be noticed by the artists. So tap into those people. Most artists probably have around about 1,000 amazing super fans. There seems to be a kind of limit to that, these fanatics. So I like what SoundCloud's doing in summary. I think that's helpful. Anything that connects the artist to the fan and has the fan's money going to the artist directly is better than that. Would certainly democratize everything. Proportional representation in the music industry.
I have another question. Do you have time for that though?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think just following up on what you said again in terms of like, you know, your idea of like if I pay $9 to Spotify and I only listen to like 2 artists, then technically you should be able to divide those $9 just to those 2 artists, right? And then you said that it was kind of a big logistical technical challenge or cost to companies, and I just kind of wanted to know why or how that is, because you know, if companies like Facebook can know which posts, or YouTube like know which posts and videos I'm looking at specifically at what time and all that, if they have that kind of data, what's stopping companies like Spotify kind of, you know, just looking at what tracks specifically I'm listening to?
The processing cost, basically. How long it takes you to process that. So for example, you've got to give data to the chart companies once a week. So there's a deadline on that. You've got to get the data by Friday. So you've got a processing deadline. It's much more expensive to calculate how you distribute your money based upon what you're listening to, because what you then have to do, the difference is you don't count users, you just count total streams. So that's very easy to say, I've got 5 million artists and we got their stream count that month, and there's the stacked rank list of the artists, and it's simply stream share. What share has that artist got of streams over the total streaming output? As soon as you bring people in, you're adding another dimension of detail. So now I've got to add how many times every single person listened to that song and what they listen to individually. So it's not artist centric, it becomes user centric. So rather than 5 million users, artists to look at and amalgamate, you've got to look at 300, 400 million users to amalgamate. So 60 times more processing at least to do that. And for no net gain. That's the problem. The money is still going to be, there's no more money, you just distributed it differently, but the cost of distribution may be prohibitive. So look, let's just take an example of a performing rights organization, those that collect money on behalf of songwriters. There's a limit, you know, if you don't know the song, it has to be identified and associated with the songwriter. That costs money. And it means that certain songs aren't worth being matched, because if you only got one play and it costs somebody 10 minutes to match that, you're going to lose money matching it. So there's a big problem, is in terms of matching and what minimum payout there should be. And again, where do you draw the line? If you had user-centric distribution, where do you cut off? Do you pay half a p to someone, 1 cent to some particular artist from your pool? Or do you have a minimum number? Is there a minimum amount that you're going to pay out? How far do you have these micropayments going out? If I listen to just one song once, does that mean I have to give them 0.04 pence out of my listens? Probably, but that still has to be tracked. So the reason why user-centric, to answer your question in summary, is it's prohibitively expensive to process for no net gain. And that's a problem.
Oh, very nice. Does anyone else have any other questions? If not, I might ask a quick question. So on your slides, on one of your slides, you mentioned that demand for that TV show like severely outstripped the supply. Mm-hmm. But I was wondering, like, in theory, shouldn't the supply be infinite, because like it could just exist there and anybody could consume it? So
yeah, but you've got bandwidth costs. That's the problem. So there's the cost of delivering to the bandwidth, and there's also the cost of the license as well every time it's played. So there is an intrinsic value, a cost to it. It's not so much now that cloud computing is now in place. At the time, there was just server-based distribution, which was expensive. But you're right, you know, it's almost negligible now. You can deliver, but at that time, it was expensive. So they could reduce the number of servers that they were holding things on. It used to be distributed servers. Now it's all cloud. And it's, when we worked out cost of holding songs, it was like almost nothing. It wasn't a significant factor in a business's strategy. It makes sense to hold as many songs as possible. So a question came up a lot of the time, which is, if we know that we've got 2 million songs in the head and there's 70 million songs, why don't we just hold 2 million? The answer is, well, it doesn't cost that much more to hold 68 million more. And you lose a tremendous competitive advantage if you say, hey, we've got all the songs in the world and we've only got the head. You won't find traction. People won't. When a service goes out to a new country, you've really got to get every major label on board to be licensed. If you don't get those licensed, and say like we open up in Namibia, and not all of the great Namibian songs are on there, the minute you go on and you can't find your song that you want, you're off. You've disengaged. And so there seems to be this kind of, you've got to have every digital service provider has to have all the songs, which is why they're all at around 70 million now, which is tremendously difficult to differentiate between them. But you're right. You're right. Right now, not much. That wouldn't be a significant factor anymore. Infinite supply.
Sure. Thank you.
Quantitative easing has occurred as well, by the way, in this. You know, in the old days. I just wanted to put the last little note. Recorded music is an anomaly. It is not the way that music should be. Recorded music is a facsimile to live. It will only kind of tap in. You won't feel the vibe of being there live. So recorded music's only been around because we had the plastic and the material to record music. If we didn't have that, it would always be live. So as a result of it being made on like multiple platforms and all 70 million songs are there and you can consume as much as you like. First of all, there's no delayed gratification. So you don't save up anything anymore. You don't go and wait for an album like I used to as a kid. So the intrinsic value of that has dropped. Because of no delayed gratification, there is almost like no perceived value. So it's as if it's become like search engines. You know, would you pay a search engine now to search? You probably wouldn't, because it's been free for so long. And because the music has been so, proliferating so much out there and so immediately available, it's almost got no value. You know, it's really hard. It's almost as if it's promotional. And maybe they ought to look at it that way now. Most, aim to get your money from merchandising and from live eventually. But I think the lack of delayed gratification and the fact that everything's available all the time means that its intrinsic value to you has dropped. It's just there. I just get it. What value is that? You need the chase really for you to actually have some value, idea of value.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. As it looks like we're about time. I hope this has been helpful to you.
Yeah, it certainly has. And I'm sure all of our members would enjoy it very much, whether they're here or watching the recording.
Good. Okay. Well, it's nice to be with you. And thank you for giving me the time. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We'll end it here. I'm going to end the recording, and do join us for more events and with Gary in the future as well. I guess just one last quick note for the society. Elections are actually running, so we're about to change committee. So if any of you are interested in running for the core positions, president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, do submit a manifesto, put a photo of yourself, and then run for the positions and further the legacy of our brilliant society. Thank you very much, and we'll end it here.
Lovely. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.